Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. So what have I got for you lovely lot today? Well, we're going to be having a go at painting this lovely little dovecote or dovecote. I think I've even heard it pronounced Dovecote. And this was taken from our recent outdoor painting day at Nyman's Manor House and Gardens. So come and join me and we'll paint this step by step together. And just before we start, I've got a very short video, it's only about 2 minutes long, of our time at Nyman's, so please enjoy that. So Nyman's Manor House and Gardens is a beautiful location run by the National Trust in West Sussex, and we had the ideal day for plein air painting. It's always good to have even light with soft shadows rather than bright sunshine. And sometimes in beautiful places like this, there can nearly be too much choice. But most of us decided on this beautiful dovecote in the gardens surrounded by the manor house. And we all had a lovely painting as a memory of a great day painting in the fresh air. And here's the reference photo, and you can always take a screenshot if you want your own version. Okay, so for today's materials, my paper is some Arche, it's cold press, £140, 100% cotton, it's on a block so won't need stretching, but of course any decent watercolour paper will do. And for my colours today, I'm using lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, cobalt blue, phthalo blue, burnt sienna, burnt umber, and for my flowers, I'm using a touch of dark steam purple, cadmium orange, and alizarin crimson. I'm also using a selection of pastel pencils and these fairly inexpensive Inscribe soft pastels. I think I got these on Amazon. 4 brushes from my range, a 3/4 inch flat, number 12 and number 6 round, and of course my trusty number 3 rigger. And here is the pencil sketch, and this one as ever is free to download from my website, link in the description below. Off we go, and I'm wetting the complete sky area with clean water with my flat brush. It's just perfect for going along these straight edges. Then dropping in a fairly watery mix of cobalt blue, making sure I leave lots of white spaces for those fluffy clouds to come through. And here for a soft shadow, I'm dropping into the wet a 50-50 mix of cobalt blue and Payne's Grey. And I've just realised I forgot to mention Payne's Grey in my materials section at the beginning, but you know I always use Payne's Grey. Now, with most of my greens today, I'm using my normal mix of cadmium yellow and cobalt blue, and this one you can see is very heavy on the blue side of things, but I've also added in a touch of Payne's Grey to darken it. So I'm wanting to throw these trees into the distance, so I'm painting them in wet and wet to get that lovely soft edge, and the fact that also it's blue biased will help to give it that sense of slight distance. And of course a bit of splatting straight into the wet wash. And here I'm splatting in some cadmium yellow, which is semi-opaque, which should give some interesting effects. So making sure the paper is totally dry, because I want to paint this wet on dry using the dry brush technique, keeping that brush nice and flat to the paper, picking up its texture. And of course always a bit of splatting here and there. And I'm leaving plenty of gaps because I want the sky to pass through, not to make this area look too solid. And you can see I'm dropping nice dark green values into the wet. Nice and dark along the bottom here because this is going to form the shape of the bushes below. And splatting paint like this is just a great way of getting pigment into your wash without disturbing it. Here I'm just forming the shape of a few leaves, not trying to be too literal, just nice and loose. Right, so once those upper trees have dried, I'm painting in a very yellowy green for these trees below. And all of this done painting with my number 12 round brush. Then, while still wet, a nice dark green along the bottom edge where it meets the wall. It'll help to give some contrast. Next, I've switched to my number 6 brush to drop into the wet this dark green. Next, so this is where I want to exaggerate my greens, so instead of my cobalt blue, I'm using some phthalo blue. And in these shrubs here, I'm just really trying to get a nice mixture of greens, sometimes using the warmer cobalt blue, sometimes using the cooler phthalo blue. But always dropping in wet those darker shadows underneath. And why not throw in a bit of alizarin crimson just for the fun of it. And here I'm just dolloping in a few drops of clean water, hopefully to force some back runs and get some interesting effects. Number 6 brush again, and some nice dark values straight in there. Next for the Dovecote, and I'm painting this with my number 12 brush and a nice watery mix of yellow ochre, but I've added in just a little bit of Payne's grey to tone it down a bit. And while still wet, I'm just dropping in a few little dollops of Payne's grey. Here I'm just lifting out with a clean dry brush to get a little lighter area along the top of the wall. Next, once it's dry for these shadows, I'm using a very watery burnt umber. I'm also using this colour in a very light and transparent way to suggest a few stones in the wall. And here a very watery Payne's grey. Now you can see I'm not trying to match the colours of the photo reference exactly, so I thought a nice wash of burnt sienna would give a nice contrast with the walls. And also a few stones here and there in the same colour. Next for the wooden doorway here, and it's quite a cool greyish brown, so I've made a 50-50 mix of burnt umber and Payne's grey, and dropping in a nice strong consistency along the top for a shadow. And I forgot about the opening in the door here, so I'm just dropping in just a nice dark green value in there, a little bit of Payne's grey on the top. Next, with some Payne's grey, I'm painting in the main tree trunks, just not too many, and mainly in the gaps. Next, with my number 6 brush and some dark green, a few little foliage details here and there, always a bit of smudging if things look too defined. Little bit of splatting with some dark green for some random texture. Yes, it's time for the trusty number 3 rigger. It's the perfect brush for these little fine branches and limbs. It's just springy and goes where it wants. Sometimes I just have to be firm and tell it to behave itself. Right, back to these windows, and this is just some Payne's grey again with my number 6 brush. Next, I'm using that same dark brown mix to start to fill in the details on the Dovecote. Now I'm really resisting the temptation to fill in every line of detail here. Always need to leave something for the viewer to imagine. And I'm using a much lighter watery mix around these windows to give the impression that there's a recess on the window. Again, less is more with these wall details. I really do have to stop myself from overworking this. Right, mixed media time, and I'm using some Faber-Castell pastel pencils, and this is a light grey. I just felt white might be just too high contrast. I'm often asked if you can use just conventional watercolour pencils for this. Yes, absolutely, they work fine. They're just not quite as opaque as pastel pencils. So now we need to let this totally dry. So it's a perfect time for a short break. And how about a glass of Dove Ale from Dovecote Brewery? It does exist. Now normally I wouldn't work this way and leave a whole section unpainted. But what I want to do is to paint most of this foreground all wet in wet. So painting in lots of clean water, then dropping in my flower colours. And please feel free to put in your own choice. But keep it simple, just blobby shapes. Right, now for the grass, and I want a really bright, vibrant green, so I'm using lemon yellow instead of my normal cadmium yellow in the mix, and I'm carefully painting around the flower shapes, but still into the wet. Next, a few granules of table salt sprinkled into the wet. Now it's worth noting that what paper and paints you use, when you sprinkle in, how much salt you use, can all determine how effective this technique is. Here just putting in stronger values of all the same colours, but still into the wet. Right, time for a bit of hardcore splatting, but this is going into a damp wash, so I'm hoping for a nice soft edge motley effect, and I'm using a good dark green and my number 12 brush. And here again a few blobs of clean water to hopefully force a few back runs. Now, when that's dry, I'm painting in a very light wash of the green, just to give a little texture to the lawn. And hopefully you can see that lovely light motley effect created by the salt. Next, I'm taking my water bottle and just giving a light spray in the foreground here, but not saturating it. And then with my green, a few random loose leaf shapes. And the water spray will just help to soften and dissolve the edges slightly. Next, it's time for the trusty number 3 rigger, just to put in a few wispy grasses here and there. Next, with my number 6 brush, I'm painting in this little twiggy thing here with a mix of burnt umber and cobalt blue. Back again with my pastel pencils, and this is a yellowy green, and I'm just going to put in a few little plant details. Now, if you haven't got any pastel pencils, you can use any opaque paint like gouache or acrylic paint. Next, with my magic scalpel, just to scratch in a few little details. Next, I'm using this fairly inexpensive set of soft pastels. I think I got these on Amazon. They're pretty cheap, but they've got nice, rich colours. So in we go with this purpley colour, and I'm using my finger to smudge the edges. Now, this is always a challenge when working with transparent watercolour, when you want a lighter value on top of a darker value. Now, I could have masked out these areas first, but adding in opaque media on top is so much easier and I think more natural looking. Does this mean it stops it from being a pure watercolour? Quite possibly. But whatever you want to call it, watercolour or mixed media, you need to go for what works for you. Right, next I'm just taking my rigger again and connecting up some of these flowers. And as a final little touch, as this is a dovecote, let's put in a few little birds, shall we? White against the dark background and a darker value against the light sky. There we go, all done, and this one in just over 3 hours. Now you may ask, do I ever use anything to seal the painting? Well, I don't normally, but as there's a fair amount of pastel on here, I'm going to use this Frisk pastel fixative, just a light spray. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. Even if you haven't got any pastels, just use whatever you've got. Have fun and have a good old splash around with that watercolour paint. And of course, please don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already. It is free. Leave a comment. I do read every single one. Can't always reply to them all. And of course, I'll look forward to seeing you all again next week for another Watercolour Wednesday. Have a great one. Cheers now.